Today we are reviewing a Stormtrooper. No wait, actually this is the Hyundai Kona, and I'm excited for this video for two reasons. First, I really like talking about affordable cars that people can actually buy, and second, my mom makes a cameo in this video. So let's take a dive into the Kona by taking a look outside. Inside, I'm going to show you some of the features and technology of this vehicle. We're going to try and throw a bike in the back to see how usable or not this hatchback is. And then last but not least, we're going to take it on the road to see what it's like to drive. Starting with the looks, recently Hyundai has never really been afraid to try something new in the styling department. The Kona is no exception. To my eyes, this looks like a spaceship had a baby with the inventor of plastic cladding. I do think the front and rear thin horizontal lights are pretty cool, but this is no doubt a busy car and maybe not for everyone. The car is seen here in Atlas white, and rather surprisingly, there is an upcharge for this color. $470 for the privilege of one of the most common colors on any car. Now, even though they charge you for white, I still think this car is a great value. More on that in a bit. There are two different engine options for the Kona depending on which trim you get. For the base car, you get a 2-liter naturally aspirated engine that makes 147 horsepower, and you can step up to a 1.6-liter turbocharged engine which makes 190 horsepower. Fuel economy isn't the best for this relatively small SUV. Regardless of the engine, if you get the all-wheel drive model, you're looking at well below 30 miles to the gallon. Of course, the front-wheel drive models are more efficient, and if you opt for the 2-liter, you can get a combined 31 miles to the gallon. What do we think of the interior of the Kona? Well, I think the interior is probably one of the strongest assets of this car. Everyone will have their own opinion on the exterior, whether they like it or not, but the interior is really well designed and really well thought out. The design itself is kind of interesting. You have a pocket over here for the passenger. There's a lot of USB charging points all over front and back, which is super useful. And then you have a lot of physical buttons for your controls. I constantly complain about having a bunch of HVAC controls and screens. Well, that's not the case here. We can control our temperature very easily up and down with this toggle. We can control the heated seats, same things with buttons. So from a usability standpoint, it's great. The visibility is really good as well. And while there are some cheap bits, you know, the door cards definitely show what class of vehicle this is. This is an inexpensive car. It's cheap plastic over here, a little bit in the center console, but some of the pieces that you touch, at least with this model, you get a leather wrapped steering wheel, which feels pretty decent. And then just the overall usability of everything else. This infotainment is great, especially for this class. I mean, it's just really quick to respond, great clarity. Obviously, the screen spans from the infotainment to the gauge cluster. Same thing with the gauge cluster. It's really straightforward. You have your speed, you have your RPM. It works. Everything works, and there's not a lot of menus to dig through. That also extends to the drive mode select. So you have this stalk here that you rotate either clockwise or counterclockwise, whether you want to go in drive or reverse. And then when you want to park it, you just press this button here for park, which I think is a really neat idea. It's just a really easy and intuitive way to have drive modes, and it's not cluttered in any way. There's so many different cars that are doing it with knobs or buttons, whatever it may be. This is probably one of my favorites to date, to be honest. So yeah, overall really high marks here. These seats are pretty decent as well. They have lumbar support in this upper tier model. They are a leatherette material and pretty wide, so they're going to fit a wide range of people. Back seats as well, great amount of space for this class of car. I have plenty of headroom at 6'1", and I even have a little bit of leg room as well. So really, like I said, the interior I think is probably this car's strongest point, and Hyundai definitely put a lot of time and resources into figuring out how to make this actually a nice place to be. But let's try and throw a bike in the back to see how usable that hatch is before we take it for a drive. Now it's time for the bike test. I recently had knee surgery, and there was no way I could have done this test without the help from my mom. So thanks, Mom, and shout out to all the moms out there for being awesome. Anyway, the bike test. If you follow these videos, you know that the size of the hatch opening is typically the deciding factor on bike fitment with these small SUVs. I'm happy to report that the Kona is pretty respectable here and it fits. My road bike just fits without any disassembly. In fact, it's so close that it's almost like they designed the car around this bike test. I can only dream. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more bike tests, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Taking the Hyundai Kona for a drive here down Lookout Mountain. What can we say about this vehicle? Well, I think immediately it's really apparent that this is a really well-rounded vehicle. Every time I get in a vehicle, I'm obviously thinking about my past experiences with a vehicle like that or a manufacturer. And I've had, hit or miss with Hyundai. They make some really good products, they make some not so great products, and I wasn't really sure what to expect with this car, but they've clearly spent time and resources actually making a good one. This is a class of vehicle that sometimes gets forgotten, frankly, with manufacturers, and there's some kind of crummy ones out there. But there's some good ones too, like the Honda HR-V. That's a great example of a small CUV that's actually pretty good. And this is up there with that. It makes for an excellent daily commuter and also makes for being good value. And that's obviously what this class of car is about, right? It's hugely about value. So why is it a good value? Well, like I said, it does pretty much everything at a pretty good level. Not going to excel at any one level, but it doesn't have any big drop-offs either. So let's start with this engine. 1.6 liter turbo, moves the car extremely well. This is mated to a more traditional transmission with actual gears. If you get the lower tier model, it has a naturally aspirated 2-liter engine, so it makes less power, going to be a little more affected by altitude like we are here, but that has a CVT transmission. And people have different thoughts on the CVT transmission. In my opinion, I think they got a pretty bad rap early on because Nissan adopted them first for the most part, and they were unreliable. So people were like, ugh, what a horrible transmission. I think in a lot of ways, they make a lot of sense for an everyday driven car. They're pretty simple. They've gotten much more reliable. They don't offer any shifts, or you don't have any sort of shifting motions like you do with a traditional transmission like this one. And there's pluses and minuses to that. Everyone kind of has their preferences, but it's nice. It's sort of nice that you can basically choose, if you want the more traditional transmission like this one, step up to the higher tier, get this 1.6 liter turbo. If you want a CVT and you're okay with that, just stick with that 2-liter naturally aspirated engine, and you'll be happy. And I think either one would be just fine. This car has a lot of torque, especially off the line. So if you are at a stop and you turn the wheel and hit the gas, it roasts that inside tire. So do you really need that much power in this car? Probably not. Outside of that, the suspension, it deals with imperfections really well. It is budget, obviously, being that it's a inexpensive car, but it doesn't feel cheap. And that's an important distinction, at least in my opinion, because sometimes you get in an inexpensive car and the suspension is just like, it's cheap, it's rattly, it doesn't dampen well, it's super harsh. This dampens pretty well outside of some really big or hard edges. It tends to be a little bit too firm on, and you might be able to thank the 19-inch wheels for that. Maybe if you step down to like the 18s or 17s, this car has at lower tiers, you would find a more agreeable ride. But otherwise, it handles really flat. It's not punishing to drive on a back mountain road like this, like in terms of it doesn't just completely fall apart when you start to go a little bit quicker. Obviously, it's not a sports car, right? It's not meant to just go carve up a canyon, but it's more than capable of handling it without, like I said, completely falling apart. So that's something that's better than a lot of Kias or Hyundais that I've driven in the past. Outside of that, what are the downsides? Really not many. I think my biggest complaint with this car, and I kind of have to dig for these, is twofold. First, the fuel economy is not great. Typically in a car like this, I think what you'll find with other vehicles in this category is that they will have a a better fuel economy rating. So I'm not quite sure why it's not so great in this car. That's kind of like the biggest drawback I could say, even though it's not hateful by any means. And then the other one is, in terms of the advanced driving aids, every car these days has some sort of advanced driving aid where it will use adaptive cruise control and pace the car in front of you, depending on the price point you buy it at, of course, and some of them now, of course, will help you steer in a lane. This one, in terms of the adaptive cruise control, works really well. Is pretty smooth in terms of pacing a car in front of you, but when it comes to the lane centering, that's where it kind of steers for you. It really kind of just goes back and forth. It's not a great example of lane centering. So I believe that's a package that you pay up for, sort of in like a more premium trim. So that's something I would probably skip. So while we transition into this portion where I would say, which model would I buy, I would try and keep it cheap. I think obviously the cheaper that you keep the purchase price, the more value there's going to be. I think there's value pretty much everywhere in the model lineup here, but especially in the lower tier models, you're going to get most of this stuff. And like I said, it's a really well-rounded vehicle for the price. I like reviewing inexpensive cars because they're cars that pretty much everyone can afford, and that's few and far between anymore, right? The average price of a sale of car is so high anymore. I believe it's over $40,000. So to get into something that starts in the mid-20s-ish and actually is a good vehicle has been great. So would really applaud Hyundai for actually putting a lot of time and energy to make a good, affordable car. And that's really the best thing that I can say about the Kona. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you made it this far in the video, I appreciate it very much. Consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you did make it this far, like I said, I appreciate it very much, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.